So this is the group presentation, BMAL 570, and it's by Richard Thomas Lape. So some of the overview that we're going to go over is going to be globalization, high context versus low context communication, managerial commitment, and communication technology. So we're going to start off with globalization. Globalization creates interdependencies. Pretty much as nations rely increasingly on global trade, they become more dependent upon functioning of a global economy. A nation with a strong international trade presence has a much higher dependency profile than that of a nation with limited participation in a global marketplace. Second topic we're going to talk about is going to be globalization and how it requires transparency. In a well-integrated global economy, a consumer might be obviously to the origin of the product he or she is consuming. Transparency is less effective for products with the brand recognition or differentiation. Thirdly, we're going to talk about how globalization requires the business people to understand the seamless marketplace. Financial professionals must be aware of the monetary impact of globalization, and including its effect with macro and microeconomics and the model that goes with that. Pretty much also the accounting regulations, the legislation, and the foreign exchange considerations. And lastly, for globalization, we're going to discuss what involves the blending and merging of various cultures. Pretty much the blending and merging of various cultures has to do with the assimilation, and globalization is an integrative model that, contrary to the results of isolation produced by arcane immigration, allows the better elements of that culture to remain intact. It pretty much has to be accepted with the new culture. Then we have our high context communication. High context communication is defined in the book Cross-Border Commerce as a culture that relies heavily on nonverbal communication. So pretty much with high context communication, everything's going to be spoken, listened, and heard from. Also with high context communication, high context cultures communication style is influenced by the closeness of human relationships. It's well structured, socially hierarchy, and strong behavioral norms. In the high context culture, the internal meaning is usually embedded deep in the information, so not everything is explicit, stated in writing or written. And then also in a low context culture, the meanings are explicitly stated thoroughly in the language. If you look at the last sentence, says people communicating usually accept explanations when something remains unclear. So if you try to get your point across, somebody doesn't understand anything, you have to repeat yourself or make another statement. That's where the trying to explain yourself comes through with the high context communication. Low context communication. Low context communication is defined as a culture that relies heavily on words. In a low context culture, meanings are explicit, stated through language. People are communicating usually explicit explanations when something remains unclear. That's through Negevi and Tella. The article Managing and Leading a Diverse Workforce. One of the main challenges in management states that managers have to possess certain values, skills, and attitudes in order to manage diversity effectively. According to changes, the need to be made and implementing them will portray the values and skills needed in overcoming the challenges of high and low context communication. Managerial commitment. Managerial commitment is first and foremost the first thing a business should identify in order to expand into a global market. Effective communication is important, and it can benefit support throughout the organization. Subjective career success positively affects organizational commitment and positively mediates both relationships between career management behavior and organizational commitment, and the relationship between organizational support for career development and organizational commitment. Communication technology. The essentials are relevant to understand what communication technology is and is based on the question and what extent are scholars and researchers aware of. This can all be influenced and used by building their own work on the research they've published in their e-journals, and that information came from Harder. And lastly, the communication technology is driven force for globalization and the role of politics, economics, and cultural aspects of business nationally and internationally, which is allowing communication to be made more efficient and accessible worldwide. And then the last few slides are going to be the references that we used and cited throughout our paper and then throughout the PowerPoint.